It's Andre from the High Performance Academy, and we're here at World Time Attack 2015 with Andy Forrest. Andy's all the way from Scotland with this insane WRX behind me. This car is pretty well known in the Northern Hemisphere, particularly it's won 10 of the best 3 times in a row, and it's run as quick as a 7.7 second quarter mile. Now Andy, with my own background in drag racing, 7.7 seconds is an incredibly fast speed from a four-wheel drive car. But not only does it run a 7.7 second quarter, it did it on radial tyres on an unprepped drag strip, and it stops and goes around corners. How on earth do you develop a car that does all of that?
It started as a street car, and we want to try and keep that street car image with the car. We do, in fact, most of our mapping's done on the street, would you believe? So we focus on mainly changing tyres for disciplines. So for us to change this car from a drag car to a circuit car, tyre change, maybe anti-roll bars, that's about it. Change the maps down a bit for a street. And
so it's actually not a major or extreme change between the two disciplines?
No, not at all. Even the damper settings, we've got a new set of KWs on there, and we tried softer, harder, higher, lower. They actually just like it in one position. They control the spring, it just does a lot.
In terms of the engine, you're producing somewhere around about 1200 horsepower, I understand, in full drag trim, and obviously that's a bit of a stretch for an EJ20 engine. What are you running in here? Is now the SVX based engine?
Yeah, Subaru SVX, or Alcoin they call it in some countries. It's the EG33, 6-cylinder version of the 22B basically, or the legacy engine, very similar. So same as an Impreza engine, but half as much again. Shares most of the components with the Impreza engine, conrods, pistons, valves, springs, all that gear, so the well-proven parts for these engines.
The capacity with that engine, so you've gone from a 2-litre based engine up to a 3.3, you've taken it out further from that as well?
Yeah, we have a stroker crankshaft at 79 millimetres, taken it out to 3.6, just under 3.6 on the 98mm bore.
So when you're running that at full power, 1200 horsepower, how stressed is that engine? How much boost are you putting into it?
2.4 bar, so 6 psi. Not really stressed at all for the setup. It's fully sleeved bores, closed deck blocks, 14mm studs. The 4-cylinder will run at that, fairly easily. And because you can't use all the power all the time, it tends to be a lot easier on a car.
With it being such a large engine, what sort of power band are you actually seeing from it? Where do you see full boost?
The headers are a lot shorter than a typical Impreza engine because we have one turbo per side, 3-into-1, fairly small bore up pipe. So we'll make full boost by around 4,000 RPM, and she runs out to 9,000.
So it really genuinely is a very streetable package. And what size turbos are you running on it?
They're GT35 with 88mm billet wheel in them. Blouch turbos, they're rated around 700 each, so we're not really stretching them. They cope just fine.
Now let's talk about the electronics package on the car. What are you running in the way of engine management? What's controlling everything?
We have a Cyvex S8 ECU in the car. It controls our engine, controls our transmission, controls our differential, and lots of features from there.
We'll talk about some of those features. So first of all, as well as the engine, it's controlling the transmission. You're running a Medina 6-speed sequential box, and how are you using the ECU to control the gear changing?
We have our own air shift set up, so you can either still pull the stick and use the load cell to shift gear, or just press the paddle, which will tell the ECU to change gear. The ECU will then pull a little bit of time. It's quite clever. It'll pull a little bit of timing out to start with for a set period of time. Then it'll give you your fuel and/or ignition cut. Then once it sees the closed loop adjustment having been made to the barrel inside the gearbox, it will let the fuel and ignition back on, but keep the ignition retard in there until everything's fueled properly on each cylinder. Then the ignition retard comes back in, so it's a very, very smooth transfer.
In terms of the downshift, is that computer controlled as well? Are you using a electronic throttle body with a auto blip downshift?
Yes, that's the auto blip downshift, and again it controls the movement of the air cylinder, so there's always a little bit of lag in these electronic throttles, so it'll give the electronic throttle the signal to open, then it'll apply the air on the cylinder. Once the the dogs engage on a downshift. Whatever happens first, it'll end the blip, or the blip will time out. Dog goes in, and you're set for the next run down. It also has downshift stacking, so it won't let me downshift if I try and downshift from third to second, and I'm still 8,000 RPM, for example. I set the minimum per gear downshift RPM, so it might be 5,000 RPM. So when you knock it down, it comes in at 7.5. So it will remember how many downshifts I want. So I come into turn 2, I want a downshift from 5 down to second. I'll just pull the lever 3 times, click, click, click. Nothing happens till I'm going slow enough, and it's just boom, boom, boom down the box.
That's some pretty smart technology there. You said it also controls your centre differential, so that's the torque split front to rear. How does that work? Give us a bit of a rundown on how you're using that feature.
The original differential in this car is 2/3 of the power to the rear, 1/3 to the front, split. And if you leave the differential unlocked, that's where the split goes. So it drives more like a rear-wheel drive car. So if you break traction at the rear and you have no locking on a diff, you'll just light up the tyres like a rear-wheel drive car. So we have a diff lock that pulls the front and rear speeds together. So I have it controlled through the traction control system, that before the traction control starts to cut power, it'll pull the differential tighter. So it'll put more power to the front or to the rear, wherever the slip happens to be. It'll pull that in. If that doesn't quite catch it, it'll start to cut the power back, and that all again depends on lateral acceleration at the time.
So as well as just controlling wheel spin, are you also using the torque split in that centre diff to affect the actual handling balance of the car?
Yes, to an extent we can do that. You can be quite clumsy driving this car. You can come out a corner knowing you've got 1,000 horsepower on tap, peg it, and it will let you generate up to a certain amount of G before the traction control decides how much traction to cut. So if you're coming out on the straight, it will allow you to get a bit of slippage. If you're still mid-corner and you do it, it will allow you less slippage, and it keeps it well controlled.
Let's talk about that traction control, because in a four-wheel drive car, traditionally that's quite difficult to manage, where all four wheels can end up spinning at the same time, and you don't really have that true indication of your ground speed. So how are you functioning traction control through that Cybex ECU?
We have a 20 Hz GPS input. Now 20 Hz in engine control terms is incredibly slow. However, the ECU will interpolate that signal. So if it misses a pulse, it doesn't really matter. If you're going 45, 46, 47, 48 miles an hour, it will, and you miss the 47, it will interpolate it out. If it just disappears, it'll continue to interpolate up. Now people think that's not quick enough for traction control, but it actually is, because what you need to control quickly is your wheel speed. So if that wheel speed on the rear jumps from 40 to 50, it will see it instantly because it's a fine resolution wheel. But the speed has only changed from 40 to 41, so it's maybe only going up 2% in speed. But your wheel speed's jumped up 20% in that time, so it still controls it absolutely fine.
When your ECU is deciding, okay, the car is wheel spinning, you've got a wheel slip issue there, what type of cut or what control is the ECU using to reduce that wheel spin?
I have a two-dimensional map which is looking at road speed against throttle position, which I may change to boost in the future, but throttle position against wheel speed. So you still have a certain amount of manual control. If you hit the throttle full, you'll get more lock than you would if you back off. So that gives you the option, if you go into a corner, you hit it hard, and the traction control and the diff lock comes in, and it starts to push the nose wide, you just come off the throttle a little bit, it'll unlock the diff and let you tuck in. And these are user configurable, so you can set it up to your own liking.
You also mentioned that you're using lateral G as an input for that traction control system. How does that work?
There's a number of tables controlling the traction control, so if you're pulling away in a straight line or drag strip, you know the characteristics of your tyre, you can populate your table with your slip angles, your ideal slip percentage angles, which are usually higher at low speeds and lower at high speeds. And you can also allow for tyre stretch as well in that table. Then when the ECU decides we need less slip, it will initially pull ignition timing, because that's the quickest thing to do. We never touch the throttle, it's way too slow, the electronic body. So it pulls ignition timing, then it will start cutting fuel because that takes longer to reinstate. You can cut it pretty quick, but you can't cut mid-cycle. So if the cycle's taking 20 milliseconds, you can't cut at 10, you have to wait 20 milliseconds. 20 milliseconds too long to wait for traction control. Instantly pulls the timing back. You can do an ignition cut, not recommended on a turbo car. It's going to get noisy, it's going to heat things, it's going to possibly cause damage. But ultimately, if you hit oil, for example, with 1,000 horsepower on, you're ultimately going to need an ignition cut to stop it. So it will come in at a higher level.
So there's only so far you're going to be able to control the engine power with the ignition retard. If you really need a massive amount of power reduction, then ignition cuts the way.
Yes, it looks at EGT, so it'll do ignition retard and fuel cut up until a point that it'll cut the ignition as well. It'll cut the same ignition pulse as the fuel pulse, so any fuel that goes in is always ignited. There's no unburnt fuel going down.
That makes sense. You've come all the way over to World Time Attack, and it's an event where we've seen a huge amount of focus on aerodynamic development, aerodynamic downforce, and it's something we know that back in Scotland you didn't have on the car. How did you go about redeveloping the car and adding some aero to the car before it shipped out?
We had the rear wing that you see on the car today, but that was all. We had a little splitter on the front, and that's pretty much because that's what our regulations allow. For World Time Attack, we've been following the series. We know how wild the aero is over here and how wild Turn 1 is and really needs that aero. So we had 2 weeks from arranging to come over here to the car going in the shipping container to do something with aero. So we frantically ran around, chopped up bits of aerofoil wing, made end plates for them, bolted them on at the regulation width. Front canards that we made up just looked about the right shape. No dynamics going into this at all really, and a front splitter which is just flat plain carbon bolted to the floor at the regulation height. So there's a lot to come from aero development and getting proper aero shape components on the car.
Now, unfortunately, your trip to World Time Attack hasn't been the dream that you were hoping for. You've suffered fairly early on in the piece a drivetrain failure in the gearbox, so you never really got a chance to put this car to the test around Eastern Creek here. Are we likely to see you back next year?
Absolutely. We've booked our tickets.
Perfect. Well, I personally really wanted to see the car in action, so we'll have to hang out and wait for next year. But thanks for coming all this way with such an amazing car, and thanks for having a chat to us today about it, Andy.
Thank you.
For online tuning courses, visit learntotune.com.